Post-draft, who are the most improved teams? What are now the most interesting divisions in the NFL? And a whole lot more in the Peacock and Williamson post-draft mailbag.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We appreciate our everydayers, and we especially appreciate it when you slam that subscribe button on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Today's episode of P&W is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. All right, let's get into this mailbag a little bit here. And we got some good questions here. I'm playing a little road game today. Got my lighting a little better than yesterday. I don't like
starting to settle in, huh?
Yeah, I don't like being away from home. The little echoey room. I'd rather
stop playing on the road, man. You got to have a good O-line to play on the road. You know? Grind it out.
Yeah.
Right.
This is like that. I've got the noodle arm quarterback. I'm like Mac Jones attempting 3 passes at a road game in Buffalo in December. You know, that's what I feel like right now.
Got to find a way to eke out a win, no matter what it takes. Block a kick, return.
We're going to do it, though, with not only our talent here as hosts, but our gracious listeners that give us a whole bunch of questions on the YouTube comments and on Twitter at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. So let's get into this thing. Michael asked the question, what is the most interesting division in football post 2024 draft?
Yeah, I saw this. I've been giving it some thought, and I think you can make a case for the AFC South, all those young arms, and the Titans are almost a totally different team than we saw them last, but Stroud and Lawrence and Richardson in particular are super interesting. The easy low-hanging fruit, and I know I'm a Steelers guy, but the AFC North, I mean, they were all over 500 last year. It's the best division. I think that's the most competitive division. I expect that to be, hold up again. I think the NFC North is a strong candidate with all the Bears stuff. Can the Lions dominate this division now year after year? Green Bay's nipping on their heels, but 2 rookie quarterbacks. But I'm going to go a little off the grid here and go AFC East. I think there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of potential chaos in the East. I think the Jets and Miami are in it to win it now, but they're very fragile builds. Like they have all their chips in the middle, and there's some age there. There's some inability to play in tough weather. That could go very wrong, and these teams could take a big step backwards, or either could hit right and win the Super Bowl. Buffalo's no longer the juggernaut. They've had a total facelift other than Allen, and the Patriots have a young quarterback. I mean, they look like the bottom feeder, but maybe they can start to build an offense.
Yeah, it depends on if we want the best division with the most competitive teams late in the season, or the ones that's going to, give us the most headlines, the most interesting builds for these teams. And, we tend to lean toward roster building here. And I think it's fascinating with the AFC East, what's going on with the quarterbacks. You've got a top 3 draft pick. You've got a Hall of Famer on a new team coming off of the Achilles. You got one of the best superstar quarterbacks in the NFL in Josh Allen. And then you got Tua, who Miami Dolphins fans love. Everybody else seems to think he's not quite there, and he's going to get a big contract. And Miami's obviously a big, fun team to watch. That's a good one. I would probably lean towards one you mentioned earlier, the North, the NFC North, with Caleb Williams now entering for the Bears. If the Bears can get into that echelon, you have 2 top 10 quarterbacks in this draft in that division. You have the Detroit Lions, who are in the NFC Championship game, and obviously the Green Bay Packers. Looks like they found their young quarterback. That's a really fun division that could go a lot of different directions. And I like the other East division as well, as far as top 2 quarterback in Washington now. New regime. Loved their first draft with Adam Peters in Washington. Of course, the Dallas Cowboys are always going to be relevant, and they've had the worst offseason, it feels like. But does that mean they're going to be not better than they were last year? The Eagles had a really good draft as well. Can they rebound from what was a really just weird season for them in 2023? So, New York Giants are, I don't know. I don't know if they're much different about the New York Giants because they still have the same quarterback they had last year. And I don't know if that's quite enough for them, but a lot of interesting divisions out there. And I like how things are starting to shake up a little bit.
Of course, they're all interesting. Every team's interesting. The whole league's interesting. Every division's, pretty much equally interesting.
Sky's the limit. Nobody's lost yet in 2024, Matt. All these
all
teams,
undefeated.
Which leads us to our next question here. And this one is from Nate Seahawks. What third or fourth place teams gained the most ground in their divisions so far this offseason? So, the worst to first teams. We always do an episode about worst to first in the summertime. Who are those teams that help themselves the most and can kind of start to compete at the top of their divisions now, man?
So scrolling through the divisions, I just have ESPN.com up and I'm just looking, at their order here. I think the Jets and Bengals, I'm only looking at teams that are in the bottom two of their division. Jets and Bengals are kind of the same in that if their quarterback's a top 5 guy, they could be right back in this thing. We know why they ended up at the bottom the way they did. Maybe the Colts. I mean, that's a bit of a leap of faith to me. I can't go Titans, Broncos, Chargers in those two divisions. I'm not willing to say the Giants or Commanders took a big step forward, compete for the division type move.
I think Commanders, Bears
will
be improved, but when will it hit? Will it be too late in the season when their rookie quarterback starts to figure it out? Are we talking more 2025 than we are 2024 for those teams? But I think they put in a lot of groundwork to improve. Yeah. So, the draft is so hard to say, okay, post-draft, this team's immediately better. How many of these picks are going to play right away and make that big of a difference right away as rookies? Because that's difficult to ask even for very high draft picks and even guys who become superstar quarterbacks. And if you want the best improvement, who made the best quarterback improvement? And it's probably the Atlanta Falcons, even though they're getting crushed right now because of their draft. They still added a right now quarterback and a future quarterback. So if that's all that matters, and I worry a lot about their defense, but I think you got to say that the Falcons have a really good shot. Not that they were a bad, bottom feeder football team necessarily last year, but if we're just looking at most improved teams, that all of a sudden is like, okay, they're ready. Just being better at quarterback was so important for the Falcons, even though there's still holes on that football team.
Yeah, of all the 16 teams that ended up in third or fourth, the Bengals and Jets aside, because we know they have quarterbacks and they got derailed.
Yeah,
Atlanta's the one for me that got better. You know what I mean? Like at least they improved their defense some. Obviously, their quarterback's different. The offense looks pretty complete. Which brings you back to that Penix conversation of you could have got even more better, better.
You could have got the best defensive player in the draft. You could have added more draft picks potentially. And again, it takes 2 to tango. I don't know if they had any trade offers, but man, they had that much conviction apparently is what they're saying about Michael Penix. So they better be right there. We have a lot of this is a fascinating storyline, and I love that's what I love about the NFL draft. The thing you can't possibly see coming that just shocks everybody. And there was a couple of picks in there that were really shocking, and that was one of them, right, with the Atlanta Falcons. Paul wants to know, as bad as the Penix pick was, shouldn't the Falcons receive more criticism about trading up in the second round for Ruka over Johnny Newton? And we did talk about that, which is why we didn't. It wasn't just the Penix pick. There was other reasons we didn't really love the Falcons draft, and we've already talked about how that's one of them. Johnny Newton, I thought was a first-round guy all day. I don't know if his foot injury was a big reason why he fell a little bit, but not only passing up Johnny Newton for Ruka when Newton is clearly the better player to me, they traded up to get him too.
Yeah, and we did touch on this yesterday, I guess it was, and that was part of the reason Atlanta was on our bad draft list is you're going to trade up for a good player. I did a lot of work on Rook, but I think he's somewhat of a project, and the Falcons, by making the Cousins move, the division they're in, should be more win now than that, which just screams Newton. And I did want to talk about this thing, not just a Powell on the Falcons. Everyone's doing that, and I've done plenty of it myself. But, oh, by the way, in this Cousins situation, there is a penalty going to come down for tampering, too. And from what I understand, it might be substantial. Like, might be an early pick next year, which makes all this even worse,
Right. So we'll see how that ends up turning out. We actually have one more Falcons question And this is an interesting one, and I didn't really think about it as it pertains to Bill Belichick, and who is not the head coach of the Falcons, even though we thought that might have been the case at one point early on in the offseason, and a whole lot more. Why aren't players traded immediately after they're drafted, NBA style, and tons more here. Boomer bust picks, questions as well, coming up on this mailbag episode, post-draft, Peacock and Williamson. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. At eBay Motors, everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance is available to you, whether it's superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and tons more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. It's super easy. There's a big green check. You know that part will fit. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home that W. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. Killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets, and not just NBA tickets. We're talking Major League Baseball games, concerts, comedy shows, theater events, whatever it is near you. You can find those tickets and get awesome last-minute deals at Game Time. There's even zone deals. You pick the section. Game Time chooses the seats for even more savings, and I love that all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. One more quick note on the Atlanta Falcons. They've created so much of a wave here in the NFL with what they're doing. Bill Belichick. Lucas wants to know, any chance Atlanta's conviction on Michael Penix cost them Bill Belichick? He didn't like the team-building strategy of doubling up on quarterbacks this offseason.
Well, there's a lot to unpeel here because, frankly, at that stage of the process, they probably should have had some conviction on Penix because they've watched him all season. He went to the Senior Bowl. You were hands-on there. At that point, I don't think he'd been to the Combine yet or any of those things. But
all the reports, the scouting reports were all in. You should know if you think he's a top 8 player, very likely.
Yes. And this is something Michael Lombardi's been talking about a lot on his podcast is if you loved him and I'm the owner, I'm like, why did I give Kirk Cousins $100 million? We didn't need that step of the process. That could have been Christian Wilkins and, whoever else. You know what I mean?
If you didn't know in time for hiring Belichick, you should have for sure known in time when you signed Kirk
Cousins. Right, yeah. Exactly. And I can't believe Belichick would be cool with doing both. Now, I don't know. I mean, I bet those things didn't contradict each other. I'm sure that timeline because I feel like if you hadn't been so in on Penix, and that's to me is part of the mistake making here by Atlanta, is it feels like they were late to the party and there's no excuse to be late to the party on that guy. I don't think loving Penix isn't the crime. Loving two people's the crime, you know what I mean? And paying for two people's the crime, and
so one of the aspects we don't talk about, and it's like juggling two girlfriends, right? It's just it's something, it's impossible. Don't try it. You know what I mean? And we see how
setting up for failure.
It always doesn't work. It's the old saying, when you have two quarterbacks, you have none. And the other thing that happens here, which you don't really think about it when you are, putting on your suit and having a meeting, you got coffee, and you and the head scout and the GM, and you kind of always just having this conversation like, oh, this is the player we love, and you get in this conversation, you think, oh, well, go get the player you love, then you make the pick, and you don't think about what everything else that comes along with it. Okay, well, now Kirk Cousins is like, what the heck, and now the fans are like, well, what the heck, and now everybody in media, including us right now, are spending a ton of time talking about the Falcons, which we probably wouldn't have before. And sometimes that's a good thing to talk about a team a lot, and sometimes it's a bad thing. And now there's just another layer of pressure on a young quarterback that young quarterbacks in the NFL don't need. He throws one bad pass, everyone's like, oh my God, what are they doing this year?
Yeah.
So and there's
or if he's slow to recover. I mean, he's coming off an injury too.
Right. And so there's just so many ways that this goes bad, and really just the cycle of fans and media and the storylines about it. And it becomes already something that makes the climb up the mountain even harder than it needs to be.
I mean, it's so much different than the Green Bay situations because everyone in the locker room knew who Brett Favre was, and he had a million pelts on the wall. Everyone knew who Aaron Rodgers was, and he had a million pelts on the wall when they drafted Rodgers and Love, respectively. Cousins is new. I mean, he doesn't even know half those guys. You know what I mean? Like, no matter, he's not Aaron Rodgers going from Green Bay to the Jets. He's going to have to earn a little bit of cachet as well. And is this guy worth the money we're dumping into him? And now all of a sudden, so it's not like he had the building to begin with. I mean, he's still trying to find a way to get to work and the best pizza joints and all that kind of stuff too. So that adds to it. It's not a stable environment. And back to Belichick, I mean, I can understand you don't want to hire Belichick. And that's what it seemed like to me. I mean, all reports are they didn't want him, not the other way around. But clearly they had to have a conversation on the owner's yacht about Cousins. We're planning on going all in on Cousins. What do you think about that? We also have an early pick and we like this quarterback class. Which do you prefer? And I'm sure he had a take on it. And it sounds like Bill was very much in tune with this draft class. He didn't take the year off in terms of scouting.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. Bill Belichick
I heard
was
it was really good.
The best part of the coverage out there. Short answer is no, I don't think it had any impact on Belichick. And maybe he didn't love, maybe those meetings happened and they didn't love him and he didn't love their plan. And it's like, okay, maybe this isn't the right spot for me right now. I'll take a year off and do the media thing. And as far as real quick question here, Matt, as far as draft coverage goes, there was a question in there about tipping picks. And for me, I don't like seeing tipped picks ahead of time. I like to see hear the sounder and hear the announcement of what the player is going to be. I was live streaming the event. So for me, the picks were coming through in the chat anyway. So it didn't change how I was receiving the draft very much because I wasn't enjoying the coverage. But if I was just someone who's sitting there watching TV, I'm off Twitter because I don't want to get the pick ruined.
Yeah, and somebody called out my coverage for Steelers.com on this one. So what happened, and I forget who it was. They said that I don't want to be a snitch BP, but Williams was breaking rules over there on live radio coverage from the facility. And it wasn't just Steeler picks. This is what happened. All round one, I was on the air for every second of the draft. So all round one, nothing was tipped. As soon as it came across the TV screen, we had the TV next to us on mute, of course, because you can't have it on the radio.
Yeah.
We would just announce it as we saw it, like everybody else saw it. On day two, though, and especially day three becomes the Wild Wild West. Whenever we saw them or whatever they popped up on our computer, it was mentioned. Not by me. I was never the one who announced it, but by my good friends, and they did nothing wrong, in my opinion.
I mean, day three, you're like 3 picks behind anyway. It's just a disaster on day three. You can't really not tip the picks on day three because you never know who's on the clock. All of a sudden, you'll see, another team has a pick that's up in 3 picks, but they actually already know what the pick is, or they wouldn't have traded up to get their player yet. And so you're behind from what you're seeing and what's really happening. So it's a lot more difficult. Round one, round two, it's more important about the tipping picks thing.
So it wasn't like somebody strolled out of the Steelers office and was like, "We're taking Zach Frazier,"
Right.
I didn't break that 20 minutes before it happened on the TV.
Brats versus hot dogs versus Italian sausage. This is an important one from Jared. He says, "I'm team bacon and cheese brat." By the way,
wow. Okay. Despite my hot dog roller background, that's a clear third.
Yes,
it's a clear third. There's just not enough taste there. There's not enough. I mean, that's a role player.
It's a bottom tier, bottom of the roster, special teamer meat.
Yeah. I mean, it's a long-time guy that was with the same team that you have a lot of good memories with and you won a lot of games with, but not even getting in the Ring of Honor. Certainly not a Hall of Famer. He's a 10-year starting guard on a good team. Those other ones are quality, in my opinion. I mean, like you can spend a little buck and even get a better piece. I mean, there's a lot of versatility there. I'm sure there's a lot more arts to making them. I would definitely enjoy a brat on a warm summer day, or even a kibasi. I mean, that's a big time Pittsburgh thing. Or a sweet sausage, a hot sausage. All that trumps hot dogs. I mean,
Right.
just,
A brat's where it's at. So that's my answer for sure. So bake. Here's the other thing. I don't know in the Pittsburgh area if you get the street vendors with the bacon wrapped hot dogs very often.
Not often.
They're all over the place for some reason in
Okay.
the bigger cities in California or some, college towns outside the bars. They smell amazing from across the street. You've had a few, you're walking down the street, you're like, oh man, I want this. It's the worst return on what you think it's going to be.
Oh, I'm so happy you said this.
Oh, it's the worst. Yeah.
This is going to be a highly, highly unpopular view, but I think bacon is like the most overrated condiment in the world. I know it's a meat, but I mean, like, throwing it on a burger,
Everybody
it on a dog.
They put it on everything.
Put it on everything.
Pizza. Fine by itself next to the eggs on your plate for breakfast.
Right.
Stop putting it on everything.
It's the 20th pick in the draft. It's not the second. I mean, it's a Kenny Pickett first round pick. It's not Caleb Williams. I mean, you can't just throw it on it. And yeah, you can put it on a baked potato. Cool. I mean, I'm cool with that. I mean, but it really belongs next to eggs with an OJ and a coffee. You know what I mean?
Season the thing you're cooking. Don't just slap bacon on it and think you're doing something.
Covering it up. Right.
Right.
Overrated. I mean, there's some underrated stuff out there, but overrated.
Completely. And I'm a bacon guy, but just
it's wonderful.
Bacon. Stop putting it on.
Still a first round pick. Yeah. Yep. But
next, let's talk about traded draft players and some boomer bust picks from the 2024 NFL draft. Today's episode of Peacock Williamson is brought to you in part by Monopoly Go. And, we got to pause here to talk again about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You've already talked about that. You've heard a lot about Monopoly Go recently on this podcast, but there's so much good stuff in this game. If you're competitive in Monopoly, like Matt Williamson is, you can team up with your friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, but you can also take down your friends as well. Steal from their vaults. You can knock down their properties. You can charge exorbitant rents on your iconic Monopoly properties, but yeah, you can have fun as well to unlock community chests and dig for treasures and find all kinds of fun and unique mini games in Monopoly with your buddies. Always new timed events that help you win big. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. It's game on. So we got a question here, Matt, which is an interesting one, about why teams don't trade players they just drafted, like you see a lot in the NBA. And I know there's some, contract rules and there's different rules with, a lot of sign and trades and a lot more trades happen in the NBA. But why don't teams trade players they just drafted? It's like an unwritten rule, but there's nothing that I know of, Matt, against. And I've always wondered this too.
Yeah, me too.
Draft that quarterback that a team's obviously trying to get up and get, then they have to deal with you, and that player can't slide to them. How come nobody ever does it? I understand why it's maybe not done a lot, but nobody's ever done it. Is it a situation where some teams finally going to do it once, and then all of a sudden teams do it? Because nobody ever drafts a guy and then immediately trades him. And as far as I know, there's no rule against doing that.
I've been wondering this since I was 10 years old. Yeah. You're not attached to that guy yet. You haven't given him a signing bonus even. I mean, even now, you could do it right now. Steelers are in search of a receiver badly, apparently. Well, if somebody came back and said, well, Zach Frazier has to be part of the deal. Oh, can't possibly do that. Why not? I don't understand it. And it reminds me of like dynasty and fantasy. Like, you're in a dynasty league. I know not everybody is, but like during rookie drafts, I'm trying to get the 5th pick in the first round off someone in my league. And we're going back and forth and back and forth. Deal doesn't get done. And then he takes Malik Neighbors or whoever. And then there's no chance to get them off him. Like, we were both after the same guy. Why can't we continue talks after you drafted this guy? He's not like, you didn't put a ring on his finger. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's strange to me.
The Penix thing is really when I really thought about it, because
me too.
I was just watching the tracker at that moment. I was in transit getting ready to start my live stream because I didn't start before the draft, and I happened to start right at that pick. And when I, put it on the tracker, and it said Atlanta Falcons logo Penix, and I didn't see the pick happen live. It happened when I was setting up, and I thought, well, that's obviously been traded. They just haven't updated the logo yet. And it dawned on me, it's like, oh, maybe this is one. Maybe we finally have it. Maybe they know some information, and it's the Raiders are trying to get up, and they couldn't quite get the deal done, so they picked the player for him, and then they're going to swap, or maybe they're waiting to see who's going to actually be there in case their player's not there a little bit later, because it would be a way to protect yourself and potentially make sure the player you want to get later is still there, and then you have that deal done. It's like, okay, the guy's there. Let's consummate this trade. It's got to happen someday, man.
It does. I mean, hypothetically, I was going to bring up the Raiders too. They took Brock Bowers at 13. Penix went 8. So they're on the clock at 8. And let's say the Raiders are calling and say, we'll give you 13 and next year's second for 8. That's not enough. Okay, they take Penix. The draft happens. What's to stop the Raiders today from saying, we'll give you Brock Bowers and next year's 1? Now, Atlanta might not want Bowers. I mean, it gets more difficult now than giving Atlanta the freedom to pick at 13.
Yes.
But they have Michael Mayer. I mean, do they really need Bowers? I mean, could we make some kind of arrangement here where I give you Bowers and a 1? And before I was only offering 13 and 2. You know what I mean? Like,
and you call that team's bluff. And then there's the opposite.
Right.
The reason probably teams don't do that is the opposite happens, where you don't know exactly what their draft board is. And you'd have to have a pretty good idea. And then you're also potentially losing out on the guy you would have drafted, and you could get stuck with the player you don't want, obviously. Or the team says, well, you drafted this guy, so you don't have leverage anymore. And I know you don't want him, so I'm going to actually offer you less. So there's a lot of ways that negotiation could go.
And of course, Atlanta at 13 might have taken Latu or Murphy or Dallas Turner. I mean, it probably wouldn't have been Bowers.
Right.
But isn't there a deal still to be made? I mean, why does that door have to be shut because the picks are in?
Sir Madromesio asks, how can teams justify making very high picks on players that either hardly played in college like Amarius Mims or hardly produced at that level like Chop Robinson? He says, coming from a very frustrated Dolphins fan, doesn't like the Chop pick because of his lack of sacks in college, man.
Because they do a ton of homework is the short answer. Because they know so much more than any of us. They've been in that building. They have a million people that know these guys. I've told you this before, like my season with the Browns. We had a Secret Service agent that ran next to President Bush's car that did all the background checks on all the guys too. I mean, like, a lot, so every injury. You've got your hands on them. Why wasn't he productive? They understand scheme and things much better than we do. Was he, like Michigan at times, or, Gary, when he came out of Michigan, the defensive end, had very few sacks, but he did his job in a Belichick-like manner. And if they would have unleashed him every 3rd and 8 and just said, sick him, he would have had more sacks, so there is, it all outweighs itself. But Chop Robinson has the best get off. Mims has the best body, these aren't Joe average specimens.
And they were drafted at 18 and 21. They weren't drafted at 4 and 5 for a reason, but they could have been drafted at, like, Amarius Mims goes back to school, just plays one healthy season. He's a top 5 pick next year.
Maybe number 1.
Right. I mean, because there might not be the quarterback that's there next year, like there was in this draft. And like, so, I think it's Kuiper, a lot of analysts do the 2025 mock draft, like the day after the draft. If Amarius Mims would have gone back to school, he'd have been consensus top 5 pick in all of those mock drafts.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's what you're hoping you're getting. And you have to figure out why. Maybe if he just doesn't love ball, doesn't play through injuries, doesn't play through pain, you get really worried. He wasn't quite as raw as you would have expected for only 8 starts, but there is some, bust potential there for a guy. Like, you got to be able to stay on the field. You got to be able to play. Mekhi Becton had some problems there. You're not out of the woods, but they believe they know the reason why, and it's not a big deal. There was first round picks in front of you, and you
Yeah.
broke your ankle or whatever it was. So
It wasn't like
happens.
Mims couldn't get on the field for Wake Forest. I mean, he was behind
Right.
Broderick Jones and, some guys that are big time players.
And he
course,
had
too.
one injury. It's not like a condition where he's bone on
Yeah.
bone in his knee and they don't think he's going to get to his second contract. It's like, okay, it's an injury that heals, and that's the only reason. And so that they have to be comfortable with that.
The other answer to the question is some teams give the coaching staff more power than others. And every coach says, well, I'll get it out of him. I'm the best coach in the world.
Yeah, I'll coach everything out of that guy.
Right.
And some coaches are the opposite, where they want to see it and they don't want the project. They're like, well, I want a 26-year-old prospect that I've seen do everything and is ready to play. And it's like, that guy's filmed good because he could do it already. So
that's a head coach thing. Like,
right,
I need to plug a running back in there that knows how to protect, that I'm not worried gets my star quarterback killed, even if he runs a 4.5 instead of a 4.4.
Yeah, he's like, I'm going to get fired if I don't win this year. I need guys who can play now. I don't care.
Screw it up. Yeah.
Yeah. And for the chop thing, I will say this in college football, it's why it's so hard to scout, especially the line. You would think it's hard everywhere because of the, all the spread and RPO offenses and stuff. It's hard to scout a lot of positions sometimes, depending on the scheme and the team you're watching. Because if it's hard to scout a corner if he never has to cover man to man against a guy, that's a decent receiver. So it's hard to find those matchups, but especially in the trenches, there were so many prospects in this draft. It's like, you only gave up 1 sack in 3 years. And it's like, wow, how come all these guys are so amazing at not giving up sacks? Because the ball comes out in 1.5 seconds.
Yeah.
RPO is like, fake.
How many true pass
fake handoff.
Yeah,
There's so few true pass sets. And I think that hurts a guy like Chop Robinson too. I saw times on tape, this guy's dynamic coming off the edge, flies out the fastest you could possibly get to the quarterback, balls out. And
I have mixed feelings about Chop, but everyone talks about the Michigan-Penn State game when Michigan just stopped throwing the ball. Well, it's because they couldn't block Chop.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
He's very disruptive. I know the sack numbers were low. He'll get to the quarterback in the NFL, and he's not the biggest guy, but he's up to the challenge physically against the run. He's not a 280-pound edge setting defensive end or anything like that, but he can get down the line of scrimmage. He can knife through there. He's physical enough, and he's up to the challenge, and he's dynamically athletic. And I believe that he'll be better. And as long as Amarius Mims is healthy, I believe he'll be really good too. So I actually don't have a problem with either one of those picks, but I get why you look at the resume and it's just incomplete on paper.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, there's a lot of projection here.
Thanks, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen every day. And thanks to all the great questions we get every single week. Apologies to the ones we did not get to, but keep them coming. You can drop them to us, tag us on Twitter at BDPeacock at Williamson NFL. You don't have to wait for Wednesday, or you can drop a question in the YouTube comments as well. And while you're there, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It helps us out tremendously, and we appreciate it. And you can subscribe everywhere you listen to your podcast. Matt and I back tomorrow right here, Peacock and Williamson.